Hello guys, this is What If Naruto Was a Scientist, Part 1. It's the first part in the What If Naruto Was a Scientist series, and so I was just gonna watch it today. A couple things before we start the video. One, the pairing is still undecided, so whoever you think the Naruto pairing should be, post in the comments below, and then the top 3 most names I see, I will put a poll up, and then you guys can vote on it. And then the other thing is, should Danzo be good or not? Also comment that down below, and I'll put up another post sometime this upcoming week. But anyway guys, without further ado, roll the intro. A 5-year-old Naruto was currently in his apartment. It was around 6 o'clock in the morning, and he couldn't sleep. He'd been living in this apartment complex for about a month now, and he only mostly stayed inside. Hiruzen had given this entire apartment complex to Naruto as a replacement for his old apartment. But like everything, there's a reason for why Naruto got the entire complex to himself. Flashback, 6 months ago. Naruto just played another prank. Harmless, like usual, but on some people who had hurt him before. Of course, there was no evidence that he did it. He was always careful to clean up everything. But naturally, people blamed him. He was currently sitting in a forest, trying to practice throwing shuriken. He heard the brush behind him rustle. He turned around, but all he saw was a red iris with 3 black tomo in it, circling around the pupil. He only had time to think Sharingan before his world went black. When Naruto woke up, he was tied to a chair and gagged. The restraints were painfully tight, and they were chafing his skin. In front of him were 2 Chunin. They were wearing the vest, so they were very easily identifiable. So the demon wakes up, one of them spoke. They were both wearing masks, so Naruto couldn't differentiate between them or tell any distinct features. Unfortunately, we can't kill him, but we can torture him. We're only about an hour, so let's make this count. The next hour, for Naruto, was the most excruciating thing in his entire life. Within that hour, Naruto had endured a steady but constant stream of electricity, every picosecond, of every second, of every minute, of every hour, of that hour. Most people will have died, but Naruto's healing factor just kept him just alive long enough to experience it. The electricity didn't do that much damage, so it could be healed, but if the voltage went too high, or if Naruto didn't have his healing ability, his brain would have shut down. The lightning jutsu did have some effect on Naruto though. He would only discover that after he was taken to the hospital by the Anbu, 5 hours later. When he arrived at the hospital, he was unconscious from the pain. Flashback end. It had taken Naruto 5 months to recover from that, but unfortunately the lightning still had some permanent effects on him. The sclera of Naruto's eyes had turned a dark grey color, and his irises were now a luminescent purple. The doctor had said that the lightning might have had some effect on Naruto's mind, but those could show up later, or not at all. Since then, Naruto hadn't really left his apartment complex. He felt no need to. But the main reason was that he was, even if he didn't want to admit it, he was slightly scared. After all, he didn't want to go through that again. Ah well, might as well do some exploring, Naruto thought. During his 1 month stay in the apartment complex, he hadn't really actually even left his room. And so there was still a lot of the apartment complex he didn't know. He ventured around for a little bit before going down to the basement. He was about to leave when he noticed that there was a section of the brick wall that made up the basement that looked off-colored from the rest. He walked over to it and tried to press it. Nothing happened. He then pressed a different section of the wall, and a single brick slid deeper into the wall. Then, completely silently, the entire section of the wall that looked off-colored moved forward and split open, revealing a circular stone stairway that led downwards. This seems probably dangerous, but whatever, Naruto thought. He shrugged and descended. When he reached the bottom, which was only about 20 feet down, he looked around and saw he was in an abandoned laboratory of some sorts. The room was about 50 feet in length and width. The ceiling was about 25 feet high. The far wall was covered by cylindrical glass tanks, 10 along the wall. All the stasis tanks were empty and primed for use. Covering the entire wall to the right was an array of medical instruments. Next, in the middle of the room was a metal table, a clean space and environment. And in the corner of the room was a bookshelf with books ranging from biology to personal journals. Next to the bookshelf was a cabinet filled with different ingredients and medical tools. Unfortunately, most of the vials and containers labeled for different ingredients were emptied or shattered. Dust covered most of the surfaces of the glass tanks, and the bookshelf looked like it had been touched by whoever destroyed most of the ingredients. Naruto looked back in the middle of the room, and like any good lab should have, a quite expensive and cleaning air enclosure. Side note, if you guys want a visual, look up like clean air enclosure with gloves. It's basically a box with like plastic gloves embedded in the side, and then there's a fan attached to the side of the box that like filters out air so that the air inside the box doesn't have any dust particles in it. And then you put your hands inside the glove and you like work with whatever's inside the box. But yeah, anyway, back to the story. Lastly, near the bookshelf was a desk with a journal on it. Naruto walked over and picked it up. It read, "To whoever should find this lab and this notebook, I have a few things to say. But first I should probably properly introduce myself. My name is Orochimaru." At this, Naruto's eyes widened, but he kept on reading. "In this journal, I leave all of my notes and opinions and all of my experiments. You might be repulsed by some, but no, that is in the pursuit of knowledge. You will probably have noticed that most of the ingredients in the cabinet are destroyed. That would be my fault, as I was forced to move most of my supplies to a different lab, in case someone found this one. However, in this journal, I will leave you a list to where you can find all the ingredients that I regularly use in my experiments. This message will be short because I'm not here to pass on my knowledge to you, but instead to inspire you, the next generation, to be curious, to gain your own knowledge. As much knowledge as you can. But I still leave you with all my books on science and a few gifts, sincerely and in the pursuit of knowledge, Orochimaru." Naruto thought to himself. Maybe this won't be so bad. Time skip. 1 year later. Naruto closed another book. This one was on how to manipulate and change DNA to one's liking. He'd slowly been recovering the ingredients in the cabinet. He'd recovered about 15% of the ingredients, most everyday things, but they'd only been the most basic herbs and poisons from stores, or the ones he could gather in the forest. He also conducted very minor operations on rats, like developing a poison that started acting 3 days after it was ingested, and wasn't traceable until it started acting. One of the gifts that Orochimaru had left was a snake egg the size of an ostrich egg. Apparently it was an egg from the boss summon of the Ryuchi cave, Manda, and a giant female cobra. As soon as Naruto had found it, he'd immediately started preparing to do mutation of the snake DNA in the hopes of gaining a summon, which was what he was doing currently. Naruto stood next to the clean air enclosure. His arms were in the gloves that were attached to the side of the box. There was a pure black adolescent garter snake inside, around 2 feet long. The garter snake was named Test Subject 0013. But the different thing about Test Subject 0013 was that there were 4 bumps along the snake's side. 2 up in the front and 2 near the end of its tail. Naruto was currently helping it shed its skin. He started the tail and used a tiny chakra scalpel, just 2 fingers, to make an insanely small incision, just enough to slice open the outer skin that the snake was shedding, but not enough to slice into the nude skin. The chakra scalpel was one of the first and only ninjutsu that Naruto knew. Technically it was a medical ninjutsu, but the real name for medical jutsu was medical ninjutsu, ergo it was a ninjutsu. Naruto decided to learn medical ninjutsu first, while his reserves were still small and easier to control. Once he got into the academy, he would start learning ninjutsu, and he planned to learn all 5 chakra natures. Naruto agreed with Orochimaru's goal of learning as many ninjutsu as he could, but where Naruto's goal differed was that he wouldn't try and escape death. He would learn as many ninjutsu as he could before he died, and hopefully passed his information onto the next generation. Naruto snapped at his thoughts, and continued helping shed the snake's skin. When he had completely removed the shed skin, Naruto observed a small, yet proportional set of legs that were where the bumps were. Each leg had 3 claws at the end of it. Naruto dropped a mouse into the chamber and watched as the snake slithered after it. The snake could use its small arms to grab onto the mouse, as shown when it latched onto the mouth with its front claws, and then proceeded to wrap around the mouse and constrict it. The muscle in the claws, and the hands by extension, or really they were technically claws, but they just looked like a lizard, were weak, and it could barely hold onto the mouse, but they would grow stronger with time. This was a success, but Naruto wasn't immediately going to use it on the Ryuchi Cave snake egg. For Naruto, this is a temporary success, a small one at that. He would continue experimenting on some snakes to create more desired results, and then, when he'd had all the desired traits he wanted, he would inject them into the Ryuchi snake cave egg. He did have an entire brain from a white-scaled snake from Ryuchi Cave. According to Orochimaru, they were solely used for the Binding Snake Glare spell, or at least that's what one of the books Orochimaru had left said. Their intelligence was on a whole other level compared to the normal giant snake summons. Adding to that fact, the normal giant snake summons were already smart. That made it even more impressive. The only problem with them being smarter is that they might turn against me, Naruto thought. Time skip. 6 months. Naruto was standing in front of the clean air enclosure space. In his left hand was a syringe with the plunger out. Inside was water saturated with his chakra. Naruto had poured so much of his chakra into the water that the water had turned purple, the color of his chakra. In Naruto's right hand was a pair of tweezers holding a small clump of flesh. Brain matter, to be exact. Naruto dropped the clump of brain matter into the syringe and placed the plunger back onto the syringe. He then watched as the brain cells dissolved in the chakra-infused water. The chakra in the water was essentially ripping apart the pieces of brain matter and taking the DNA from every cell. The rest of the cell was ripped apart and used as fuel. About 5 months ago, Naruto had started experimenting with the white-scaled snake brain. He had injected the dissolved cells into various normal fertilized egg cells. The solution Naruto had created was a genetic code that would change the pre-existing genetic code for the brain of a snake. This alteration would synthesize a snake brain that would be almost identical to white-scaled snakes. To put it in more basic terms, the snake would be exponentially smarter. So far, every attempt he had tried had failed. The snakes that Naruto had used, mostly cobras and rattlesnakes, grew very fast and were insanely smart, but they weren't loyal to Naruto. For the first 2 weeks or so, while the snakes were under 2 meters long, they listened to him. But as soon as the snakes got confident, they started attacking him. Luckily, Naruto had anticipated something like this, and implanted a small plastic failsafe in all of the snakes' heads, right below the brain, the first week they hatched. The failsafe was a plastic bead with an electric seal on it. It was actually created by Orochimaru, and he stopped using them when he created the cursed seal. Luckily for Naruto, there was still a small stash of them left in the lab. It wouldn't work on humans, though it served its purpose, in that whenever it was activated, it released a small electrical current that rendered the brain unconscious. Naruto had immediately started learning how to make more of them, so that when the stash he had ran out, he'd be able to make more. It took him a whole 3 months to learn the seal and how to make the failsafe, but it was worth it. But now, Naruto was confident that he was one step closer to his goal. In all the other DNA solutions, he'd either use distilled water or just regular snake blood. This time, the water was infused with his chakra, and Naruto could impress emotions and thoughts into the chakra. With this solution, when Naruto started infusing the water with the chakra he made sure to think his hardest about loyalty to himself. The effect was that the chakra had a feeling of loyalty to Naruto implanted into it. This meant that as the brain was developing, the one thought that would always remain there, in the forefront of the mind, was an absolute feeling of loyalty to Naruto. However, in this state, the chakra is practically useless for most ninja techniques. But for Naruto's purposes, it would work. With any luck, the injection would work, and the snake would have an unquestionable amount of loyalty for Naruto. It took a while to perfect this technique, but, after 7 months of testing, it finally worked. Naruto shook himself out of his thoughts before placing a banded secret egg and the DNA solution-filled syringe inside the chamber. He then pressed a button, and the fan at the side of the box turned on and filtered out all the dust particles. When it was done, a little over a minute later, Naruto placed his hands inside the gloves in the front of the box and got to work. He carefully held the egg in his left hand and picked up the syringe with his right. Naruto then poked a hole in the egg with the syringe and injected the liquid inside of the syringe. When Naruto was done, he quickly healed the hole in the egg shell with medical chakra and then placed it into an incubation box, something that Naruto had created to incubate fertilized animal eggs, only small ones, around the size of a chicken egg. Time skip, 6 more months. Success, Naruto mentally said, as he watched the adolescent banded sea crate slither its way through a maze that Naruto had set for it. The experiment injection on test subject 0037 had worked. The snake's brain was almost identical to white-scaled snake, and its intelligence also matched the white-scaled snake. There were a few side effects. The snake resembled a viper, but with a more paddle-shaped tail. Its scales were also denser, but still streamlined, which allowed it for easy swimming. In short, the snake was adapted to hunt both on land and in the sea. But what excited Naruto the most was that the snake was completely loyal to him, without a fault. The snake was currently 4 months old, about to turn 5 months old, and did everything he said without question and without complaint. In addition, because the snake was black and white and not too long, it made it perfect for sneaking around in buildings. Naruto was positive that it was able to use chakra, because he could almost never find it. Though with how smart it was, Naruto wasn't ruling out the fact that it could use chakra. Surprisingly, the snake took great pleasure in surprising Naruto with the things it could do. The only way he knew where he was because Naruto had some fledgling sensor abilities. Naruto had already learned some very interesting pieces of information from the snake and decided to create more as they were incredibly useful, though that would have to come at a later date. But that brought up the question as to where to house his new breed of snakes and any future animals he created. When his main summon hatched, it would grow to a humongous size, and if he was going to be adding the recon snakes and any other animals summons he would have in the future, he would need a massive space with multiple terrains. The most ideal solution would be to create a summon realm, but this in itself was insanely difficult, not to mention if he asked someone else to do it for him, then more people would know he had summons and he had a lab. The other option would be to simply use a training ground and have a summoning scroll keyed to each and every one of his successful test subjects. This would allow him to summon each one of them with a thought and the summoning jutsu. But that also had its downsides. The home of his summons could be found and entered easily, which wasn't good. Enough of that, Naruto thought as he snapped out of his thinking. The snake didn't have claws that Naruto had mutated onto one of his earlier test subjects, but that was fine as it increased the snake's bulk and made it harder to move stealthily. I think I'll name you Inspector. No, it's not quite, right? How about Spectre, Naruto thought. Yes, that'll do nicely. Time skip, 1 month. It's good to set goals and accomplish them, Naruto thought. From his seat at the desk, he glanced over at the wall where the stasis tanks were located. In the one to the far left was filled with greenish-colored liquid, and floating in that liquid, with lots of wires attached to it, was a snake egg the size of an ostrich egg. It was the egg from the Ryuchi cave. Naruto had finally started incubating it. He had first injected the egg with the genes that he wanted to add to it, that being claws and increased intelligence, before placing it back in the stasis tank to monitor it. If anything wrong happened to the egg, the wires attached to it would signal for the machine to place the egg in full stasis. Unfortunately, placing the egg in the stasis machine meant it would take over a full year for the egg to hatch. But the upside was that the egg would hatch without any problems, and Naruto could monitor it carefully. Naruto was about to turn back to his book about chakra control when a voice right next to him spoke. So this is what you're doing with your free time. Naruto's head snapped to the right, and upon seeing Hiruzen, he looked down in embarrassment before looking back up again. Sorry for not telling you, Naruto began in a quiet voice. Hiruzen cut him off by raising his hand. He suddenly looked extremely weary. I don't blame you for not telling me, and honestly I'm impressed with your work so far, Hiruzen said. But the line between science and inhumane is blur. And I'm going to let you continue your experiments, but I think that having a versatile Mednin that can also fight well is pretty useful. But I have 3 conditions that you have to meet. 1. You have to share a copy of your experiment synopsis on all of your experiments that you do with me. 2. You'll be attending the academy a year early. And 3. I might delegate to you a couple of experiments that I want done. Naruto nodded, and a determined expression sat on his face. Good, Hiruzen said. Now why don't you show me around your lab? Naruto nodded once more and hopped off the chair, and moved towards the stasis tanks. Because he was in front of Hiruzen, he missed a flash of regret in Hiruzen's eyes. I might have failed with Orochimaru, but I will not fail with Naruto, Hiruzen thought, before following Naruto. Anyway guys, thanks for listening, hope you have a great day.